The space station hung in the darkness between stars. It was called Concordia Prime, and it was huge, bigger than any city on Earth. The station was neutral ground, a place where different species could meet and talk without fighting. For 3 years, humans had been coming here to negotiate with two powerful alien races. Ambassador Richard Hayes stood at the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars. He was tired. The kind of tired that came from years of careful words and diplomatic smiles. Richard was in his 50s with gray hair and lines around his eyes. He had been trying to make peace for so long that sometimes he forgot what Earth looked like. Behind him, Karen Phillips was reviewing data on her tablet. She was younger, in her 30s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Karen was his deputy, the person who saw patterns in everything. She made charts and graphs that showed what the aliens might do next. Right now she looked worried. "We are so close," Richard said quietly. "After all this time, we are finally close to an agreement." Karen looked up from her tablet. "I hope you are right. But something feels wrong. The Vakran have been too quiet today." The Vakran were one of the two alien species at the talks. They looked like giant insects with hard shells and too many legs. But they were not really individuals. They were a hive mind, many bodies controlled by one shared consciousness. Talking to them was strange because you were never sure if you were speaking to one being or 1,000. The other aliens were the Solith. They were made of crystal and light, beautiful and cold. They communicated by flashing different colors, which human computers had to translate. The Solith were old, much older than humanity. They had been traveling the stars for thousands of years. Humans were the newcomers, the young species that had only recently figured out how to travel faster than light. The aliens did not trust humans. They thought humans were dangerous because humans expanded so quickly, building colonies on any planet they could find. But humans needed those colonies. Earth was crowded and humanity needed room to grow. Tonight there was a dinner, a ceremonial meal to celebrate what everyone hoped would be a breakthrough. Dr. Gregory Palmer, the human xenobiologist, had spent weeks making sure the food would not poison anyone. Each species ate different things, and getting it wrong could cause a diplomatic disaster. Gregory was careful about everything. He studied the aliens like they were the most important puzzle in the universe. The dinner hall was enormous. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into shadows. Tables were arranged in a circle, with each delegation sitting in their own section. Humans sat together wearing their best formal uniforms. The Vakran clustered in their area, their shells clicking softly as they moved. The Solith hovered above their seats, glowing in gentle colors. Richard gave a speech. He talked about cooperation and mutual benefit. He talked about how the three species could build something better together than they could apart. He chose his words carefully, the way he always did. When he finished, the Solith flashed pale blue, which meant approval. The Vakran clicked their mandibles in what passed for applause. Then the food was served. Each species had their own dishes, prepared according to their needs. The humans ate roasted vegetables and protein that tasted almost like chicken. The Vakran consumed some kind of paste that smelled terrible to human noses. The Solith absorbed nutrients through electromagnetic fields, which meant they did not eat at all in the traditional sense. Everything was going well. Richard was starting to relax, to think that maybe finally they would succeed. Then the Vakran ambassador started shaking. Its whole body convulsed, legs twitching in ways that looked wrong. Other Vakran rushed toward it, but it was too late. The ambassador collapsed, its shell cracking as it hit the floor. The room exploded into chaos. Alarms started blaring. Security personnel from all three species rushed in, weapons drawn. The Vakran were making a horrible screeching sound, a noise that made human ears ache. The Solith flashed angry red, the color of accusation. Richard stood frozen, his mind trying to process what had just happened. Beside him, Karen was already moving, her tactical training kicking in. She grabbed his arm and pulled him back from the table. "We need to leave," she said urgently. "Right now," but it was already too late. Vakran security surrounded the human delegation. They were not pointing weapons yet, but their body language was clear. Nobody was going anywhere. Through the confusion, Richard heard the Vakran speaking, their translator making their hive mind voice sound mechanical and emotionless. "Poison. Human poison. We detect it in our ambassador's body. You have murdered our representative." Richard felt his stomach drop. "No, that is impossible. We would never do such a thing." But the Vakran were not listening. They were already presenting evidence on holographic displays. Chemical analysis showing trace elements of a toxin that, according to their data, could only have been manufactured by humans. The evidence looked damning. Too perfect, too convenient. Karen was staring at the data, her mind racing through possibilities. Richard, this is wrong. Look at the molecular structure. That compound does not exist in our databases. Someone made this up. But her voice was lost in the noise. The solith were flashing red and orange now, colors of anger and suspicion. They were siding with the Vakran. After years of tension, years of watching humanity expand across the galaxy, the aliens had found a reason to act. The humans had given them an excuse, even if that excuse was a lie. Within an hour, both alien powers delivered their ultimatum. Surrender the people responsible for the assassination. Submit to an investigation under alien authority. Accept restrictions on human expansion, or face the consequences. They gave humanity 72 hours to comply. Richard knew what those consequences would be. War. A war that humanity could not win. The Vakran had millions of ships grown in organic factories on dozens of worlds. The Solith had weapons that could turn entire planets into glass. Humanity had been in space for less than a century. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and alone. He made the only decision he could. Start the evacuation. Get every human off this station. We leave in 6 hours. Gregory Palmer was protesting. But we did nothing wrong. We can prove our innocence if they just give us time. They do not want proof, Karen said quietly. They want a reason. And now they have one. The evacuation was chaotic but organized. Years of emergency drills paid off as human personnel gathered their belongings and headed to the docking bays. Outside the station, alien warships were already gathering. Richard could see them through the windows, dozens of ships forming a blockade. They looked like predators circling wounded prey. The human ships launched in waves, engines burning hard as they pulled away from Concordia Prime. One transport took a hit from a warning shot, its shields flaring bright as the energy beam struck. But they all made it out, jumping to faster than light speeds as soon as they cleared the station's gravity well. Richard sat in his cabin aboard the diplomatic vessel, Freedom's Hope, staring at a blank screen. He needed to compose a message to Earth, to the Federation Council, to everyone who had trusted him to make peace. He had failed. After 3 years of work, 3 years of careful negotiation, everything had fallen apart in minutes. He started typing. The words came slowly, each one heavy with the weight of what they meant. We came in peace. We negotiated in good faith, and we have been betrayed. The galaxy has made its choice. Now we must make ours. As the ship jumped through space toward Earth, Richard knew that everything was about to change. Humanity had been trying to fit in, to be accepted by the older species of the galaxy. They had been careful and diplomatic, always trying to avoid conflict. But that time was over. The aliens wanted a war, and whether humanity liked it or not, they were going to get one. The Situation Room was deep underground, beneath the city of Geneva. It was built to survive almost anything, from nuclear strikes to meteor impacts. Today, it was filled with the most powerful people in human civilization, and they all looked worried. The walls were covered with screens showing maps of human territory, fleet positions, and the locations of alien forces. President Elizabeth Morris sat at the head of the long table. She was a former military officer who had spent 20 years in the Navy before turning to politics. People said she had ice in her veins, that nothing could shake her. But even she looked troubled now. The future of humanity rested on the decisions made in this room. Fleet Admiral Charles Bennett stood at the main display, pointing to red markers that showed alien fleet movements. He was old for a fleet commander, but his mind was sharp and his experience was invaluable. They are mobilizing everything, he said. The Vakran have pulled ships from patrol duty across their entire empire. The Solith are doing the same. Combined, they outnumber us 5-1 in capital ships, 7-1 in total vessels. General Linda Torres leaned forward, her fingers drumming on the table. She commanded all of humanity's ground forces, and her tactical mind was already working through scenarios. Our colonies are spread across 37 systems. Most of them have minimal defenses. If they coordinate their attack, they could hit us everywhere at once. We cannot defend everything. The room was silent for a moment. Everyone understood what that meant. Colonies would fall. Millions of people would be at risk. The war would be over before it truly began. Richard Hayes, who had just arrived from Concordia Prime, felt sick. This was his fault. He had failed to prevent this. But then Dr. Nathan Cooper spoke up. He was the director of the Advanced Weapons Research Division, a thin man with wild hair who looked like he had not slept in days. "We have options," he said. "Projects that have been in development for years. Insurance policies, we called them. Technology that we hoped we would never need to use." President Morris looked at him. "Explain." Nathan pulled up files on the displays. "Kinetic kill vehicles that can reach nearly the speed of light. Swarm drones that overwhelm any point defense system. Cyber warfare tools designed specifically to target alien computer architecture. We have been preparing for this possibility since we first met hostile life." Karen Phillips, sitting beside Richard, added her own analysis. "I have been studying alien combat doctrine for 3 years. They have not fought a real war in centuries. Their tactics are old, based on honor and ritual. They expect enemies to fight the same way they do. Line battles, formal engagements, rules about what targets are acceptable." She stood and walked to the display, pulling up footage of historical battles. "Humans are different. We remember what war really is. We know about guerrilla tactics, asymmetric warfare, total war. We have fought each other for thousands of years. That experience is our advantage." Admiral Bennett nodded slowly. "You are saying we should not fight the way they expect. We should use our experience against their inexperience." "Exactly," Karen said. "They expect us to surrender when we see the odds. They have never fought an enemy that gets more dangerous when cornered. That is what humans do. We fight harder when we are losing." Richard Hayes found his voice. "We need to do more than survive. We need to make an impact so strong that the galaxy never underestimates us again. If we are going to fight, we need to fight in a way that changes everything." President Morris looked around the table, studying each face. These were good people, smart people, but they were asking her to approve weapons and tactics that crossed lines. Lines that humanity had drawn for itself after centuries of brutal warfare on Earth. She had to decide if survival was worth the cost. "Show me everything," she said finally. "Every weapon, every tactic, every option we have. Then we will decide which lines we are willing to cross." For the next 6 hours, they went through it all. Nathan Cooper presented Project Prometheus, the weapons programs that had been hidden in black budgets for decades. General Torres outlined Operation Phantom Line, a strategy of strategic withdrawal combined with vicious counterattacks. Admiral Bennett described new fleet tactics that abandoned traditional battle formations entirely. The plan was risky and brutal. Instead of defending every colony, humanity would evacuate the most vulnerable systems, but they would leave surprises behind. Traps, mines, automated weapons. They would make the aliens pay for every meter of space they took. Meanwhile, human ships would operate in small packs, hitting supply lines and isolated targets. They would avoid big battles and focus on bleeding the enemy slowly. It was not the kind of war the aliens expected. It was not even the kind of war that followed the rules of civilized species. But it was the kind of war that humans knew how to fight. The kind of war they had been fighting against each other for their entire history. President Morris made her decision. Activate Project Prometheus. Implement Operation Phantom Line. Give Admiral Bennett full authority to engage enemy forces using any tactics he deems necessary. She paused, looking at each person in the room. "We did not start this war, but we are going to finish it. And when we do, the galaxy will understand exactly who humanity is." The orders went out immediately. Across human space, military bases activated emergency protocols. Soldiers who had been on leave were recalled. Factories that made civilian goods switched to military production. Evacuation ships began moving toward the most vulnerable colonies, preparing to pull millions of people back to safer systems. But not everyone was evacuating. Some people were staying behind, volunteering to operate the automated defenses and traps. They knew they probably would not survive, but they also knew their sacrifice would buy time for others. That was another thing about humans. They understood sacrifice in a way the aliens did not. In orbit around Earth, the fleet was gathering. Not the entire fleet, that would be stupid, concentrating all their forces in one place. But enough ships to show strength. Admiral Bennett stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching as more vessels arrived. Each ship was being loaded with new weapons, new systems, technology that had been theoretical until now. He thought about the enemy commanders. sitting in their comfortable ships confident in their numerical superiority. They thought this would be easy. A quick war to put the upstart humans in their place. They had no idea what was coming. Humans had been practicing war since they learned to make fire. This was what they were good at. Karen Phillips was in her office preparing intelligence briefings. She had been right about the frame job. Analysis of the poison showed it was manufactured, designed to look like human technology but with subtle differences. Someone wanted this war. Maybe a faction within the Vakran, maybe some third party. It did not matter now. The war was happening regardless of who started it. She pulled up psychological profiles of the alien leadership. The Vakran thought in terms of the hive, sacrificing individuals for the collective good. The Solith valued beauty and order, seeing war as a necessary but distasteful duty. Both species believed they were superior to humans. That belief was going to cost them. President Morris prepared to address the Terran Federation. Every human world would hear her message. Every colony, every ship, every citizen. She stood in front of the cameras, wearing her formal uniform, and spoke with quiet confidence. My fellow humans, you have all heard about what happened at Concordia Prime. The accusations against us are false. We are innocent of the charges. But innocence does not matter to those who have already decided to judge us. The Vakran and Solith have given us an ultimatum. Surrender or face destruction. I am here to tell you that we will not surrender. We will not bow to threats. We will not abandon our principles or our people. She paused, letting her words sink in. The aliens think they know what humanity is. They think we are weak because we are young. They think we will break because we are outnumbered. They are wrong. We are the species that climbed from caves to stars in 10,000 years. We are the species that never stopped exploring, never stopped dreaming, never stopped fighting for what we believe in. If they want to see what humanity can do when pushed to the wall, then we will show them. The message spread across human space at the speed of light. People watched on screens in homes and bars and public squares. Some cried, some cheered, but everyone understood. The time for peace was over. Humanity was going to war, and they were going to fight like only humans could. With courage, with creativity, with the desperate fury of a species that refused to give up. The aliens wanted to see humanity's response. Now they would get it, and it would shake the entire galaxy. Commander Jacob Miller sat in the pilot seat of his frigate, watching the sensor display. Around him, 5 other ships floated in the darkness of deep space. They were far from any star, far from any planet, invisible in the endless black. They called themselves Wolfpack Alpha, and they were hunting. Jacob was young for a commander, only 32, but he had trained his entire adult life for this. His crew trusted him completely. They had to. In a few minutes, they would either be heroes or dead. There was not much space between those two outcomes in this kind of mission. Contact, whispered his sensor officer. Vakran convoy. Exactly where intelligence said it would be. 6 transport ships, 3 escorts. Jacob studied the display. The Vakran ships were moving in a standard formation, confident and unafraid. They had no idea that human ships were nearby. The new stealth coating worked perfectly, scattering sensor beams so that the human frigates looked like empty space. It was one of the technologies from Project Prometheus, and this was its first real test. All ships prepare to engage. Jacob sent over the encrypted channel. Wait for my mark. We hit them fast and hard, then we run. No heroes, no chances. Understood? 5 acknowledgements came back. Good. His pack was ready. Jacob watched the convoy get closer, waiting for the perfect moment. The Vakran escorts were scanning space, but they were looking for ships at long range. They expected any enemy to attack from far away, using missiles and energy weapons in a traditional engagement. They were not expecting knife fighters to appear right next to them. Mark, Jacob said calmly. Execute. The 6 human ships lit up their engines and accelerated hard. They appeared on Vakran sensors like ghosts, suddenly becoming real. The range closed to almost nothing in seconds. Before the Vakran could react, the humans fired everything they had. Missiles streaked across the tiny distance, too close for the point defense systems to track. Energy weapons carved through shields that were tuned for long-range combat. The first Vakran escort exploded, its reactor breaching in a flash of blue light. The second took hits across its entire length, atmosphere venting from a dozen holes. The third tried to bring its weapons to bear, but human ships were already past it, targeting the transports. 8 minutes. That was how long the entire fight lasted. When it was over, the convoy was gone. Destroyed or crippled, drifting in space. The human ships were already accelerating away, jumping to faster-than-light speeds before Vakran reinforcements could arrive. They left nothing behind except debris and confusion. Jacob let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. They had done it. First blood of the war, and they had not lost a single ship. But he did not celebrate. This was just the beginning. The real test was still ahead. Similar attacks happened across a dozen systems at the same time. Captain Nicole Brown led a bomber wing against a Solith mining operation, destroying 6 months of resource gathering in a single raid. Lieutenant Stephen Parker took his submarine-class vessel deep into enemy space, planting mines and shipping lanes that the Solith thought were completely safe. All across the frontier, human forces struck and vanished, leaving the aliens angry and confused. But the aliens were not helpless. They had numbers and power, and they used both. The Vakran sent a massive battle fleet to the human colony of New Terra, 60 capital ships and hundreds of smaller vessels. It was overwhelming force, designed to crush any resistance and send a message. Take our worlds and we will take yours. When the Vakran fleet arrived at New Terra, they found the planet quiet. Orbital stations were abandoned. Defense platforms were offline. There were no human ships in sight. It looked like the colonists had run away, leaving their world behind. The Vakran commander must have thought it would be easy. The fleet moved into position around the planet, preparing to claim it for the Vakran collective. Ships spread out in orbit, setting up a blockade pattern. Everything was going according to their plan. Then General Linda Torres triggered the trap. All across New Terra, thousands of concealed launchers activated. They had been hidden underground in mountains and valleys and even under the oceans. Now they fired, hurling solid projectiles into space at incredible speeds. Not missiles with guidance systems and warheads, just chunks of metal and rock, accelerated to hypersonic velocities by electromagnetic force. The Vakran ships were not ready for it. Their shields were designed to stop energy weapons and explosive missiles. Their point defense systems tracked sophisticated threats with guidance systems, but these were just dumb rocks, millions of them moving too fast to dodge. The sheer volume overwhelmed every defense. Projectiles slammed into hulls like hammers. Shields collapsed under the relentless barrage. 3 capital ships died immediately, their reactors pierced by kinetic strikes. 7 more took heavy damage, their crews scrambling to save their vessels. The beautiful, orderly Vakran formation turned into chaos. The surviving Vakran ships retreated, jumping away to safe distance. They sent back reports that humans had mined an entire planet, turning it into a weapon. The Vakran leadership was horrified. It seemed like such a waste, such an ugly way to fight. But humans saw it as a message. This is what it costs to take our worlds. Every colony you attack might be a trap. Every victory might be a disaster. Meanwhile, Dr. Gregory Palmer was fighting a different kind of war. He had been working with intelligence services, using his knowledge of alien biology to create cyber weapons. The Solith communicated through light pulses, their ships controlled by crystalline computers that processed information in ways human machines could not match. But Gregory understood how they thought, and he knew their weakness. He created a virus, a piece of code that looked harmless but caused subtle problems. It did not crash their systems or shut down their ships. That would be too obvious. Instead, it introduced tiny delays in their targeting solutions, small errors in their navigation calculations. Nothing that would be noticed immediately, but enough to make a difference in combat. The virus spread through Solith networks slowly, passed along in normal communications. Within weeks, Solith ships across their empire were experiencing mysterious malfunctions. Weapons that should have hit their targets missed by centimeters. Courses that should have been perfect drifted slightly off. The Solith engineers could not figure out what was wrong. It looked random, like bad luck. But it was not luck. It was human ingenuity, fighting a war in the shadows. The decisive moment came at Arcturus Station, a human fortress guarding the approaches to core human space. The Solith sent their own massive fleet, 60 capital ships intending to break through in a single overwhelming assault. Admiral Victoria Chen commanded the defense with only 20 ships and the station's guns. By every calculation, it was hopeless. But Victoria Chen was not planning to fight fair. She was planning to fight smart. As the Solith fleet approached in their beautiful, precise formation, human ships scattered and retreated. It looked like panic. The Solith pressed forward confidently, expecting an easy victory. They were wrong. Hidden among the asteroids around Arcturus were hundreds of autonomous drones. Each one was small, hard to detect, and carried a fusion warhead. When the Solith fleet entered the kill zone, Victoria Chen activated them all at once. The drones swarmed from every direction, too many to track, too many to shoot down. The Solith point defenses lit up space with energy beams, destroying drone after drone. But there were always more. While the Solith were distracted, human ships attacked from unexpected angles, targeting command vessels with precise strikes. The battle turned into a chaotic mess, nothing like the orderly engagements the Solith trained for. Lieutenant Paul Anderson flew his fighter through the chaos, leading his squadron in a desperate attack run. Their target was the Solith flagship, a massive vessel that coordinated the entire enemy fleet. Paul knew most of his squadron would not make it back. But if they could take out that flagship, the whole Solith attack would collapse. Fighters fell around him, shot down by defensive fire. But Paul kept going, kept pushing forward. He got close enough to launch his missiles, close enough to see the flagship's hull up close. The missiles struck home, destroying the flagship's main weapon array. Without their primary weapons, the Solith commanders decided to retreat rather than risk their expensive ship. Paul made it back to Arcturus station, but most of his squadron did not. 70% casualties. The price was high, but they had won. The Solith fleet retreated in disorder, their first major defeat in centuries. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. Something changed after Arcturus. The aliens had been confident before, certain that their superior numbers would win quickly. Now they were uncertain. These humans did not fight like anyone else. They did not follow the rules. They used tricks and traps and tactics that no civilized species would consider, and it was working. The war was not over, not by a long shot, but humanity had proven something important. They could not be beaten easily. If the aliens wanted to destroy humanity, it was going to cost them more than they ever imagined. The war had been going for 4 months, and cracks were starting to show. Not in humanity, though the humans were tired and stretched thin. The cracks were appearing in the alliance between the Vakran and the Solith. Two species that had been united in their distrust of humanity were now questioning whether this war was worth the cost. The Vakran, with their hive mind, saw war as a numbers game. They could accept heavy losses because the collective would survive. Individual Vakran did not matter, only the whole. They wanted to press forward, to use their superior numbers to overwhelm the humans through sheer force. Send more ships, more soldiers, more everything, until the humans ran out of bullets and bombs and strength. But the Solith were different. Despite being crystalline beings, they valued individual lives more than the Vakran did. Each Solith was unique, irreplaceable in their own way. They had agreed to this war believing it would be quick, a punitive action to put humanity in its place. 4 months later, they were losing ships and people in a grinding conflict with no end in sight. Ambassador Richard Hayes was working behind the scenes to exploit this division. He had made contact with a faction of Solith who had opposed the war from the beginning. These Solith believed the evidence against humanity was too convenient, too perfect. They suspected something was wrong but had been overruled by their more aggressive leaders. Through careful intermediaries, Richard provided them with human intelligence. Analysis that showed the poison at Concordia Prime was not human-made, despite appearances. Evidence suggesting the assassination might have been orchestrated by Vakran extremists who wanted to eliminate human competition before humanity grew too strong. It was not proof, not yet, but it was enough to plant doubt. The Solith moderates began asking uncomfortable questions. Why were they fighting this war? Who really benefited from eliminating humanity? Was it worth losing thousands of their people to help the Vakran expand? These questions spread through Solith society like ripples in water, slow but persistent. Then President Elizabeth Morris authorized an operation that shocked everyone. She called it Operation Mercy, and it was the last thing anyone expected in the middle of a brutal war. Human ships began rescuing survivors from destroyed alien vessels. Vakran and Solith prisoners of war were treated well, given medical care, fed according to their dietary needs, and even allowed to send messages home. The first time it happened, the aliens thought it was a trick. A Vakran crew had been stranded when their ship was crippled in battle. They expected to die in the cold of space. Instead, a human rescue ship arrived, pulled them aboard, and gave them medical treatment. The Vakran were confused. Why would the enemy save them? Because it is the right thing to do, said the human captain when asked. We are at war, but you are not our enemy. Your leaders are our enemy. You are just following orders, same as our people. We will not let you die if we can prevent it. The rescued Vakran sent messages back to their collective. Other incidents followed. Video footage spread across the galaxy showing human medics treating wounded Soloth soldiers, being careful with their fragile crystalline bodies. The images were powerful, creating a contradiction that neither alien species could easily explain. How could humans be savage warmongers if they showed such care for their enemies? Dr. Gregory Palmer was serving with one of these medical teams when a journalist interviewed him. The interview went viral across multiple species. Gregory spoke simply and honestly. We did not want this war. We tried for 3 years to make peace. But since we must fight, we will show the galaxy who we really are. We will fight fiercely when we have to. But we will not abandon our principles. We will not become monsters just because someone accused us of being monsters. The psychological impact was immense. Many aliens could not reconcile the species that fought with such vicious creativity with the same species that showed such compassion to defeated enemies. It created doubt about the entire narrative of the war. Maybe the humans were not the aggressors. Maybe they had been telling the truth all along. While diplomacy and mercy worked on alien minds, General Linda Torres was planning the boldest military operation of the war. She wanted to strike at the heart of the Vakran collective itself, not the homeworld. That would be too provocative, too close to genocide. But the orbital shipyards where the Vakran built most of their war fleet. It was an insane plan. The Vakran home system was hundreds of light years behind enemy lines, protected by defense stations and patrol fleets. Getting there undetected would be nearly impossible. But Linda Torres was not planning on being undetected. She was planning on being so fast that it would not matter. Captain Samuel Wright volunteered to lead the mission. He was an experienced officer, calm under pressure, the kind of person who could make split-second decisions without hesitation. He took a small fleet of the fastest ships humanity had, all equipped with the best stealth technology and newest weapons. The journey took 2 weeks of careful navigation through hostile space. They used every trick they knew, hiding in nebulas, flying silent through empty systems, avoiding sensor nets and patrol routes. When they finally reached the Vakran home system, Samuel Wright did not hesitate. He led his ships straight in, engines burning at maximum power. The Vakran defenders detected them immediately, but they were too shocked to react quickly. Human ships in the home system? It was unthinkable. How had they gotten here? By the time the Vakran organized a response, Samuel Wright was already attacking the shipyards. The assault was brutal and precise. Human ships did not waste time or ammunition. They targeted the construction facilities, the dry docks, the manufacturing plants. Each weapon hit exactly where it was supposed to, maximizing damage. In less than 20 minutes, Samuel Wright destroyed shipyards that represented decades of Vakran development. But before jumping away, Samuel Wright broadcast a message on all Vakran frequencies. He spoke clearly without anger or hatred. We could have attacked your cities. We could have killed billions of your people. Your homeworld was defenseless and we had the weapons to devastate it. But we did not. We struck only military targets. We are not monsters. We are not the threat you think we are. Remember this when you decide whether to continue this war. Then the human ships jumped away, vanishing back into deep space before the Vakran fleet could catch them. They left behind burning shipyards and a very clear message. Nowhere is safe. If humans can strike your home system, what else can they do? How can you win a war against an enemy that fights without rules but shows mercy without reason? The Vakran hive mind experienced something it had never felt before. Fear. Not fear for individual Vakran, they lost individuals all the time. Fear for the collective itself. If humans could reach their home system, if humans could destroy their shipyards, then maybe humans could threaten the hive mind itself. The central nodes, the queens, the core of their entire civilization. Internal debates began within the Vakran collective. Some nodes wanted to escalate, to throw everything at humanity in one final overwhelming assault. Others wanted to pause, to reconsider, to ask whether destroying humanity was worth the risk of destroying themselves. The unity of the hive mind fractured for the first time in centuries. The Soloth were watching all of this carefully. They saw the Vakran struggling with doubt. They saw human ships rescuing alien survivors while simultaneously conducting impossible military operations. They saw evidence that the original assassination might have been a Vakran plot. and they started to wonder if they had chosen the wrong side in this war. Luminary Crystalsong was the leader of the Solith Peace faction. She had opposed the war from the beginning, arguing that humanity deserved the benefit of doubt. Now she was gaining support, as more Solith questioned whether the cost of this war was justified. She began reaching out to human intermediaries carefully and secretly, exploring the possibility of a separate peace. Karen Phillips was monitoring all these developments from Earth. She saw the patterns forming, the cracks widening. The aliens were losing their unity, their certainty. The war was far from over, but the momentum was shifting. Humanity had survived the initial assault. They had proven they could fight and win despite being outnumbered. Now the question was whether they could translate military success into political victory. President Elizabeth Morris convened another meeting of her inner circle. Admiral Bennett, General Torres, Richard Hayes, Karen Phillips, and others. They reviewed the situation carefully. The aliens were weakening, but humanity was exhausted too. They could not keep fighting forever. They needed to find a way to end this war before everyone lost too much. "We need to offer them a way out," Richard Hayes said. "A way to end the war that lets them save face. We have proven our point. We have shown them we cannot be bullied or destroyed easily. Now we need to show them we can be reasonable." President Morris nodded slowly. "Prepare proposals for peace negotiations. Make it clear we are willing to talk, but only as equals. We will not surrender, and we will not accept blame for starting this war, but we are ready to find a path forward." She looked around the table. "We shocked the galaxy with how we fight. Now let us shock them with how we make peace." 6 months after the war began, the aliens sent a message. They wanted to talk. Not on neutral ground this time, but on human terms. The Solith and Vakran were requesting permission to come to Mars, to meet in a building that humanity would construct for this purpose. It was an acknowledgement of something that would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. Humanity was now in equal power. The building was called Unity Hall, and it was built in record time. Thousands of workers labored day and night to create a space worthy of this historic moment. The architecture blended human and alien design elements, a statement that all three species could find common ground. When it was finished, Unity Hall stood on the surface of Mars like a monument to hope. Ambassador Richard Hayes returned to the negotiating table. He looked older now, worn down by months of war, but there was strength in his eyes that had not been there before. He was no longer the diplomat desperately trying to prove humanity deserved a seat at the table. He was representing a species that had proven itself in fire and blood. Karen Phillips accompanied him, as did General Linda Torres. The general was there to send a clear message. Humanity's military was ready, capable, and would remain vigilant. Peace was preferred, but humans were not afraid to keep fighting if necessary. It was diplomacy backed by strength, the only kind of diplomacy that worked. The Solith delegation was led by Luminary Crystalsong, the progressive leader who had opposed the war from the start. She arrived glowing in soft blue and green colors, which in Solith language meant regret and hope. Through her translator, her first words were simple but significant. "We made a mistake. The Solith Empire judged humanity wrongly. We allowed fear to guide us instead of wisdom. For this we are deeply sorry." The Vakran sent speaker 347, which was unusual. Normally the hive mind spoke with one voice, any Vakran could speak for all. But this time they sent a specific individual, one of the rare Vakran who maintained some independence of thought within the collective. It was a gesture of respect and a sign that the hive mind was changing. The negotiations began carefully, with all parties testing the boundaries. But early on, human intelligence operatives presented something that changed everything. Working with sympathetic Solith investigators, they had traced the assassination at Concordia Prime back to its source. They had proof now, real evidence, not just suspicion. The poison was created by a radical faction within the Vakran collective, a group that believed humanity's rapid expansion was an existential threat to the established order. They had manufactured the toxin, made it look like human technology, and killed their own ambassador to start a war. Everything that followed, all the death and destruction, had been based on a lie. The revelation hit the Vakran delegation like a physical blow. Speaker 347 stood motionless for several minutes, its body rigid as the hive mind processed this betrayal from within. When it finally spoke, its voice carried an emotion that few had ever heard from a Vakran: shame. The collective was deceived. We were manipulated by our own extremists. This is a failure of the hive mind itself. We cannot blame others for our blindness. The Vakran paused, mandibles clicking softly. Tens of thousands died because we did not question what we were told. This guilt belongs to all of us. President Elizabeth Morris addressed the assembled delegates with measured words. She stood tall, her military bearing evident in every movement. We all bear scars from this conflict. Humans lost people too. Colonies were damaged. Ships were destroyed. Families were torn apart. But the greatest tragedy would be to learn nothing from all this suffering. She looked at each delegation in turn. Humanity entered this war reluctantly. We fought because we had no other choice. But we never forgot who we wanted to be. We showed mercy because it was right, not because it was easy. We treated prisoners well because they were people, not because we expected anything in return. And now we will make peace the same way, not because we are weak, but because we are strong enough to choose a better path. The peace treaty that emerged from those negotiations reshaped galactic politics. The terms were clear and fair. Humanity would be recognized as a peer power with equal status to the older civilizations. All three species would establish joint military protocols to prevent future misunderstandings. An independent body would be created to investigate diplomatic incidents, so that accusations could not be weaponized again. Trade agreements were signed that acknowledged humanity's advantages in manufacturing and tactical innovation. Cultural exchange programs were established to foster understanding between species. And most importantly, all three governments agreed to share the truth about what had really happened, so that their citizens would know the war had been built on lies. But beyond the formal terms, something more fundamental had changed. The galaxy's older civilizations had been forced to confront their own stagnation. They had grown comfortable, predictable, locked into ways of thinking that were thousands of years old. The war with humanity shook them out of that complacency. It showed them that age and numbers did not guarantee victory. Innovation, adaptability, and the will to fight mattered more than the size of your fleet or the length of your history. The peace created opportunities for cooperation that would have been impossible before. Commander Jacob Miller, the young officer who had led Wolfpack Alpha, was promoted and given command of a joint human-Solith rapid response force. Its mission was to combat piracy and protect trade routes, working together to make space safer for everyone. Dr. Gregory Palmer established the Institute for Xenological Understanding, funded by all three species. The Institute's purpose was to study alien cultures and biology, to build bridges of knowledge that would prevent future conflicts. Gregory threw himself into the work with the same passion he had shown during the war, believing that understanding was the best defense against hatred. Captain Nicole Brown became an instructor at a new joint military academy. Human Vakran and Solith officers trained together there, learning from each other's strengths and experiences. The academy was controversial at first, but it quickly proved its value. Officers who had fought against each other were now fighting alongside each other, building friendships across species lines. 1 year after the war ended, a ceremony was held at Concordia Prime. The station had been rebuilt, better than before, as a symbol of renewed cooperation. Representatives from all three species gathered in a memorial garden created to honor those who had died in the conflict. The garden held plants and minerals from each species' homeworld, growing together in artificial soil. Ambassador Richard Hayes planted a tree from Earth, an oak seedling that would grow for centuries if properly cared for. Beside him, Luminary Crystal Song placed a crystal formation that glowed with internal light. Speaker 347 contributed a living plant from the Vakran homeworld, one that would spread and connect with the other plants through its root system. It was fitting symbolism. Separate but connected, each species maintaining its identity while becoming part of something larger. Karen Phillips watched the ceremony from nearby, standing beside Richard. She spoke quietly, almost to herself. We showed them our strength, how we could fight, how we could win against terrible odds. But maybe what really mattered was showing them our character. That we could be fierce without being cruel. That we could be strong without being bullies. That is what shook the galaxy. Richard nodded slowly. We wanted to fit in, to be accepted. We spent 3 years trying to prove we were civilized enough to join the galactic community. Then the war forced us to prove we were strong enough to demand respect. But in the end, what earned us a place was being ourselves. Flawed, creative, compassionate, stubborn humans. Back on Earth, President Elizabeth Morris received a communication from an unexplored region of space. A new alien species had detected the radio signals from the war and its resolution. They were requesting contact with humanity specifically. Their message explained that they had been watching from a distance, studying how different species behaved. What they saw in humanity intrigued them. The new aliens wrote, "We have seen how you wage war and how you make peace. We have seen your courage and your mercy. We wish to learn from you. We wish to meet these remarkable newcomers who fight like demons but treat prisoners like honored guests. We think humanity has something important to teach the galaxy." Elizabeth Morris smiled as she read the message. It was a tired smile but genuine. "It seems our reputation precedes us now. Humanity is no longer the new species trying to fit in. We have become the civilization that others turn to, that they want to learn from. The question is, are we ready for that responsibility?" She called a meeting with her advisors to discuss the new contact. But in her heart, she already knew the answer. Humanity would meet these new aliens. They would share what they had learned, both in war and in peace. They would continue to be themselves, stubborn and creative and compassionate even when it was difficult. Outside her window, Earth turned slowly in space. Human ships patrolled the system alongside Solith and Vakran vessels, working together to protect their shared interests. It was a new era of galactic civilization, one shaped indelibly by humanity's response when peace talks had collapsed. 3 years had passed since the war ended. The galaxy was a different place now, shaped by lessons learned in blood and fire. The changes were everywhere, some obvious and some subtle. But all of them traced back to that moment when humanity refused to surrender and fought back in ways nobody expected. Commander Jacob Miller stood on the bridge of his ship, the peacekeeper watching his mixed crew work together. Half were human, a quarter were Solith, and the rest were Vakran. 3 years ago, they would have been shooting at each other. Now they were tracking down pirates who preyed on merchant vessels, regardless of what species those merchants belonged to. His second officer was a Solith named Radiance and Dawn, who communicated through flashes of light that were automatically translated. "Contact ahead, Commander. 3 small vessels attacking a cargo ship." "Looks like the Blood Moon Gang," Jacob smiled. The Blood Moon Gang had been operating for months, thinking they could exploit the chaos of the post-war period. They were about to learn a hard lesson about the new galactic order. "All hands to battle stations. Let us show these pirates what cooperation looks like." The peacekeeper accelerated smoothly, its mixed crew working with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible a few years ago. Human tactical thinking combined with Solith precision and Vakran coordination. The pirates did not stand a chance. Within 15 minutes, 2 pirate ships were disabled, and the third was fleeing at maximum speed. The cargo ship was saved, its crew grateful and alive. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out daily. The war had taught all 3 species that they were stronger together than apart. Joint patrol forces, mixed trading fleets, cooperative research stations, the borders that had once been tense lines of confrontation were now busy zones of exchange and interaction. On Mars, the Institute for Xenological Understanding had grown into a major center of learning. Dr. Gregory Palmer walked through its halls, passing students of all 3 species. They were studying each other's biology, history, culture, and philosophy. The goal was understanding, the kind of deep knowledge that prevented fear and hatred from taking root. Gregory stopped to observe a class where a Vakran professor was teaching human students about hive mind communication. The students were fascinated, asking questions that would have been considered rude before the war. The Vakran professor answered patiently, understanding that curiosity was better than ignorance. This was what Gregory had always dreamed of, species learning from each other instead of fighting. At the Joint Military Academy orbiting Earth's moon, Captain Nicole Brown was teaching a class on unconventional tactics. Her students were a mix of human, Solith, and Vakran officers, all eager to learn. Nicole had fought in the war, seen things that still haunted her nightmares. But she had also seen how creativity and courage could overcome impossible odds. "The key is not to fight the way your enemy expects," she told the class. "The moment you become predictable, you become vulnerable. Always keep thinking, always keep adapting." That is what saved humanity during the war. We did not have superior numbers or technology. We had superior adaptability. A Solith student asked a question, "But how do you maintain honor while fighting unconventionally? How do you know when you have crossed the line?" Nicole considered the question carefully. That is the hard part. During the war, we had to make difficult choices. We used tactics that made us uncomfortable, but we never lost sight of who we were. We fought fiercely, but we did not commit atrocities. We took prisoners and treated them well. We rescued enemy survivors. Being unconventional does not mean being cruel. It means being creative about how you achieve your objectives while staying true to your principles. President Elizabeth Morris was in her final year of office. She had led humanity through its darkest time and guided it into a new era. Now she was preparing to pass the torch to her successor. But before she left office, she had one more mission to complete. Meeting the new aliens who had requested contact 3 years ago. The new species called themselves the Meridian, and they were unlike anything humanity had encountered before. They were energy beings, existing as patterns of light and electromagnetic fields. They had been watching the galaxy for centuries, studying other species from afar, never making contact, until they saw humanity fight and make peace. The first meeting took place on a specially built station in neutral space. Ambassador Richard Hayes led the human delegation, with Karen Phillips at his side. The Meridian representatives appeared as shimmering columns of multicolored light, their forms constantly shifting and flowing. Through a newly developed translation system, the Meridian spoke. Their voice was like music, complex harmonies that formed words. We have observed many species rise and fall. We have seen empires built on conquest and cooperation, but we have never seen a species quite like humanity. You are young, barely children by galactic standards, yet you taught the old ones a lesson they desperately needed to learn. Richard Hayes felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. We did what we had to do. We fought because we had no choice. We showed mercy because it was right. We are not special. We are just trying to survive and find our place in the galaxy. The Meridian's light pulsed with what might have been amusement. You are more special than you realize. Most young species either become aggressive or submit to the old powers. You did neither. You fought back with ferocity, but you never became monsters. You proved that strength and compassion are not opposites. They are complements. That is a rare wisdom. Over the following months, humanity established formal relations with the Meridian. The energy beings shared knowledge that was centuries ahead of what the other species possessed. But they were selective about what they shared, giving technology that would help species grow without making them dependent. They saw potential in humanity, potential to bridge the old and new, to bring fresh thinking to a galaxy that had grown stale. Karen Phillips found herself in high demand as a consultant. Other species wanted to understand how humans thought, how they approached problems so differently. She traveled across the galaxy giving lectures and advice, always emphasizing the same points. Stay flexible. Question assumptions. Value individuals. Never stop learning. These were not uniquely human traits, but humans had refined them through necessity. The Vakran Collective underwent significant changes in the years after the war. The hive mind had always been monolithic, speaking with one voice. But the betrayal by extremists within their own ranks forced them to reconsider. They began allowing more individual Vakran to maintain independence, to question collective decisions, to provide different perspectives. It made them slower to act, but also wiser and more thoughtful. The Solith Empire embraced cultural exchange with enthusiasm. Solith artists began incorporating human and Vakran influences into their work. Solith scientists collaborated with researchers from other species. They discovered that mixing different perspectives led to breakthroughs that would have been impossible alone. The Solith had always valued beauty and knowledge. Now they were finding both in unexpected places. On Earth, a museum was built to commemorate the war. It was not a celebration of victory, but a memorial to sacrifice and a reminder of lessons learned. Visitors walked through exhibits showing the battles, the diplomacy, the suffering on all sides. The museum did not hide the difficult parts. It showed the brutal tactics humans used, the mistakes they made, the lives lost. But it also showed the mercy, the courage, the determination to do right even in terrible circumstances. The final exhibit was a recording of President Elizabeth Morris's speech to the galaxy at the end of the war. Her voice echoed through the museum hall. We are not perfect. We made mistakes. We did things that haunt us. But we never stopped trying to be better. We never forgot that our enemies were people too, and when we had the chance to make peace, we took it. That is what humanity is. Flawed but hopeful, fierce but compassionate. Forever growing, forever learning, forever reaching for something better. Lieutenant Paul Anderson, who had sacrificed his squadron to save Arcturus Station, visited the museum with his daughter. She was too young to remember the war, growing up in a galaxy where humans, Vakran, and Solith children played together. She looked up at her father with wide eyes. "Daddy, were you really in the war?" Paul knelt down to her level. "Yes, sweetie, I was. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also the most important. We fought so that you could grow up in a better galaxy, one where different species are friends instead of enemies." She thought about that for a moment. "Did we win?" Paul smiled. "We survived, and we made friends with our enemies. That is better than winning." Back in Geneva, President Elizabeth Morris prepared to give her final address before leaving office. She stood at the same podium where she had declared war 3 years ago. Now she was declaring peace, not just the absence of fighting, but genuine cooperation and friendship between species. She looked out at the assembled crowd, seeing humans, Solith, and Vakran standing together. "When peace talks collapsed 3 years ago, we faced a choice," she said. "We could surrender or we could fight. We chose to fight, and our response shook the entire galaxy. But the real shock was not our weapons or tactics. It was our character. We showed the galaxy that being strong,